Uh, and Steve, if you want to go ahead and kick it off, we've got
All right.
the start of our agenda today, and go ahead and do the approval of minutes.
Okay, great. Want to welcome everybody to the April 22nd meeting of the Cooperative Forecasting Group. Um, First item on the agenda is the approval of the February 25th minutes. They were distributed earlier. I hope everybody had a chance to review them. And we'll take a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll approve them.
All right, we have a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion to approve and a second. Any edits, changes to the minutes? All right, hearing none, we'll call for a vote. All in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. The ayes have it, and the minutes are approved. All right, the next item on the agenda is a presentation by the U.S. Census Bureau on population estimate updates. We have with us George Hayward and Eric Jensen from the U.S. Census Bureau to present on the methodology and updates for the vintage 2025 population estimates. So I will turn it over to George and Eric. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having us. I'll go ahead and share my screen. I know we just tested this, but could someone just confirm if you see?
You're good, George. It looks good. I
Okay,
see.
hold on.
We see your slide deck.
It's the
Okay.
slideshow. It's not your notes or anything. So it looks good.
Okay, hold on one second. Although it's not, let me. Okay, hold on a second. It was not moving to the next slide. So I know we just tested this. Give me a second.
Sometimes it does freeze up on the first slide with Zoom.
Okay, maybe it was just frozen then. Okay, let me reshare and see if that one. All right, confirming that you can see the first slide. Okay, now let's see if it moves. Okay, that moved. You saw it move on your end?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, good morning, everyone. My name is George Hayward, and I'm a survey statistician and demographer in the Population Estimates program, and I'm here today with my good friend and colleague, Eric Jensen. And today we'll be going over the methodology updates for the vintage 2025 population estimates. So the Population Estimates Program is responsible for developing the annual estimates products as per Title 13, Section 181. These are the official estimates of the population and housing units for the Census Bureau, and they're used extensively across government, academia, and public and private sectors. For example, they serve as denominators for key statistical indicators like the fertility and mortality rates produced by the National Center for Health Statistics. Surveys, including the American Community Survey, Current Population Survey, and many others, use these as controls. They're also a staple for planning at the state and local levels, determining how many schools, hospitals, and public services are needed. They factor into countless studies and research projects. And finally, although at the Census Bureau we're not involved in funding formulations themselves, the estimates are used in the distribution of trillions of dollars in federal funding. So it's quite an exciting program to be a part of. And every year we build a time series of estimates that we call a vintage that starts at the date of the most recent decennial census and extends through the vintage year, which represents the latest year of estimates available. In this case, that would be 2025 or vintage 2025. And the new vintage always supersedes any prior vintages. Every year, we release estimates for over 80,000 areas in the United States and Puerto Rico, ranging from the nation, which you can see at the top of the slide, all the way down to cities and towns that you can see at the bottom of the slide. This table shows the level of detail that we release for each geographic area. And in short, the main takeaway here is that the larger the geography, the more detail that we are able to release. So for example, the total resident population, that's not very detailed. We release that for all geographic levels. components of change, which are a little bit more detailed. That would be births, deaths, and net migration. We released that for most geographies, but not cities and towns or Puerto Rico municipios. Population characteristics, we released that for all geographies except for cities and towns. And here, these bottom 3 rows of the table, you can see we released the monthly population just for the US. And then we also published estimates of the group quarters population by age, sex, race, and Hispanic origin for the nation, total group quarters population for the states and counties, and then housing unit estimates in that bottom row for the nation, states, and counties. This is our release schedule, and as you can see, we publish our estimates on a rolling basis from what is usually December through June of each year. This year, our first release was in January since we were delayed a bit because of the furlough in the fall. So our first release was January of 2026. That was population totals, components of change, and the voting age population. We are about to release in May population totals for cities and towns, and then housing unit totals for nation, states, and counties. And if you stay tuned all the way till June, we'll have another big release for the population by age, sex, race, and Hispanic origin, and then population by age and sex as well. If you are excited about this data and wondering how you can access the treasure trove of estimates that we have, there's a few different ways to do it. One is you can just go to the census.gov homepage, and you will see there's a surveys and programs tab at the top. If you hover over that, you can click on population estimates. Then there'll be a tab for data, and that will take you to all the data you can hope to find on our website. We also have a tool called QuickFacts available on census.gov that will generate many of our estimates for you and bring in some other data as well. And then finally, there is an API that we have available. However, I did check, it does not go up to our current vintage. The most recent vintage there is vintage 2023, but increasingly data users are accessing our data through the API. So now I'll share some high-level information about the methods that we use for our estimates. And of course, you can also reference any of the method statements that we have on our website, which have plenty of detail about each of these components. So we use what's called the cohort component method to measure population change. And that builds out from the last census and uses administrative records and survey data on births, deaths, and migration to build out our estimates. So we start with an estimates base that represents the data as of the last decennial census. Then we add to that births and subtract deaths. We call those two components together natural change. Then we add net migration, which has two components. There's domestic migration and international migration. And that gives us a population estimate. For housing units, we also have a components of change method. And we start again with the most recent census, and we use a variety of survey and administrative data to estimate change in the housing stock, specifically in terms of building permits, estimates of non-permitted construction, mobile home shipments, and estimates of housing. So we have a housing unit base. We add new residential construction, add new mobile homes, subtract lost housing units, and that produces a housing unit estimate. And then finally, for the sub-county population estimates, these would be cities and towns. The way we build this out is we start with that current housing unit estimate, which we just talked about on that last slide. We start with that. We multiply that by the 2020 persons per household to get an estimate of the household population. Hang with me, we're going to make a quick turn. We then adjust that to be consistent with the county household population because the sub-counties have to sum up to the county. And then from there, we add the group quarters population estimate, and that produces our resident population estimate. And the majority of our group quarters administrative record data actually comes from our partners in the Federal State Cooperative for Population Estimates. And so we're very thankful to our staff there who work with us closely each year. So earlier this year, we released a blog that focused on how we make updates to our data and methods each year. And we can refer to that as the population estimates lifecycle. We have a little visual illustration of that on the right, but I'll go into each of those components in a second. So at a high level, we are constantly doing research, and many of our research projects cannot actually be completed within in between vintages. So sometimes it will span multiple years, but it's really important for us to take it slowly and take it seriously because we have built-in review throughout the process. Simulation, we're constantly testing new data or methods and estimates before we implement a change. I can't speak for all the teams, but as part of the base pop team, this year we did 16 different simulations because we were implementing a big change. And so we were constantly running and reviewing simulations. Production starts in the fall after we receive the input data needed for each new vintage. Dissemination, that's our publishing of the estimates, which we had just talked about, starts usually in December each year and goes through June. And then review is actually a constant throughout each of these different stages, but we ensure all estimates are as accurate as possible, consistent, and demographically plausible. We also have a stellar review team that I'd like to give a shout out to as well. So although the number and impact of improvements will vary from vintage to vintage, most updates that we have fall within two different categories. One is base population updates, and the other is revisions to components of change. The components of change are the ones that we saw earlier, the births, the deaths, and the migration components. In both cases, this can include newer revised input data or changes to the methodology. When we make a change to the methodology, we typically use the new methods for the full time series, which means that the estimates for prior years could also change. There can also be changes to how we bring the base and the components together to produce the estimates, but that type of change is less frequent. So here's that cohort component method that you saw earlier on a slide, and I'll just briefly preview each of the changes that we made this year that we're going to talk about in the upcoming slides. So to the estimates base, we moved from the blended base to the modified age and race census base file, or the MARC-B file. We utilized 2020 race and ethnicity distributions for births. And then for births and deaths, we completed a phased transition to NCHS input data. For net migration, which remember has two components, for net domestic migration, we adjusted for input data delays. And for net international migration, we improved the recency and geographic location of the data. And then finally, for group quarters, we improved our method for incorporating special census results. So before we talk about updates to the base population, I want to provide a little bit of background on the modified age and race census file, or the MARC file. So last year we released this file, the 2020 MARC file, which has 2020 census race data in the same categories that we use in the population estimates. Specifically, the 2020 census included an option for people to identify as some other race, but the input data that we use to produce the population estimates does not have that some other race category. So each decade, we produce the modified race data where we reallocate those some other race observations into the official OMB race categories. This file also includes smoothed age data for a subset of observations to address age heaping in the 2020 census. Age heaping is when there's disproportionately high values at multiples of 5 or 10 in the age data. So having this file allowed us to incorporate the 2020 MARC file into the vintage 2025 estimates. So as for the base population, historically, we started using the decennial census as the base for the population estimates in the year following the census, which in this decade would have been for the vintage 2021 estimate series. But because of delays in the 2020 census products and the new disclosure avoidance system, we were not able to use the 2020 census as the base. And instead, we've been using what we called the blended base, which we combined data from the 2020 census, vintage 2020, and the result of 2020 demographic analysis to create. So it's basically a bit of a hybrid of those three different data sources, taking the best parts of each, and that was the blended base. But for vintage 2025, we phased out the blended base and now use a modified version of the MARC file. We call this the MARC-B file. This new file has updated geographic boundaries. For example, Connecticut is in the new geographies and not the old counties. It includes changes from the count question resolution and the post-census group quarters review programs. It also incorporates county level age, sex, race, and Hispanic origin by major group quarters type from the 2020 census. That's what we're getting from the MARC file right there. and adds an additional county level adjustment to account for the undercount of children ages 0 to 10 in the 2020 census. I'd also like to emphasize at this point that these types of significant changes are typically and ideally limited to the start of the decade. So it's not ideal that we're releasing this with our vintage 25 population estimates, but the MARC file just became available to us in March of 2025. So it's really as soon as we could have incorporated that data. All right, for vital statistics, due to improvements in the timeliness of NHCS data, we completed the transition to a single source of input data for births and deaths, which is from NCHS, which phased out data provided by our partners in the Federal State Cooperative for Population Estimates. Each vintage, births are adjusted using the base population to resolve inconsistencies between NHCS and census race reporting. The basic idea here is that the race assigned to the births in the NCHS data are not necessarily equal to the population age 0, the race of the population age 0 in the census. And so we have a process to harmonize those. This adjustment improves the demographic reasonableness of the population born since the census as they age forward in time. The last update was in 2021 and used the blended base, which had 2010 base race distributions. But vintage 2025 now uses the MARC B file for this adjustment, which allows for the incorporation of race distributions from the 2020 census, which is a big improvement. For domestic migration, the general method that we use to estimate domestic migration is that we match 2 years of administrative records and then look for a change of address. And we use those changes of address to develop migration rates. For ages 0 to 64, we use tax filing records from the Internal Revenue Service, and that's typically cycle 39 tax return data. However, this year, delivery of those data were delayed, and so we instead use the cycle 26 data from the IRS instead. However, we expect that this will only apply for 2025, and then we'll continue using the cycle 39 data next year. For the population age 65 and older, we use Medicare enrollment records. However, new disclosure avoidance policies at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services delayed the delivery of updated data for 2025. And because of that, the July 1st, 2024 to July 1st, 2025 net migration rates for this population are going to reflect migration rates from the prior migration period, which would be July 1st, 2023 to July 1st, 2024. And we do expect that change to be permanent. So each decade, we also incorporate special census data into the population estimates. A special census is a basic enumeration of population, housing units, and GQs conducted by the Census Bureau at the request of a governmental unit on a cost reimbursable basis. For vintage 2025, we received several special census results for incorporation into the estimates effective the date of the special census. Now, last decade, we would simply insert the special census value to the time series regardless of how it differed from prior data or broke with trends, but that could cause abrupt shifts in the data series. So this year, we improved our method for incorporating the special census GQ population. This new approach creates a smoother, more reasonable time series and maximizes the use of other data that we have after that special census date. All right, finally, I will talk about updates to net international migration, or our NIM estimates. So we estimate net international migration in 5 components. The largest of those is that top box there that you see for non-US born immigration. That's people coming into the United States. Next, we have non-US born immigration. That's the second box that you see here, or people migrating out of the United States. That is the second largest component. In those final 3 boxes, we have net migration between the US and Puerto Rico, net US born migration, and then finally net movement of the armed forces. So for vintage 2025, we've made updates to those 3 components that are still highlighted there. And I'll go into each of those 3 in a little more detail right now. So the first of those, and the largest, is for the non-US born immigration. So for this, we use the American Community Survey data on the foreign-born population and population born abroad of US citizen parents whose residence 1 year ago was abroad to develop the national total. We often refer to this as ROYA, R-O-Y-A, the acronym that you see there. Now, for most of this decade, we have used administrative data from other agencies to adjust the ROYA estimate to make it more current. And we'll walk through this in a second. For vintage 2025, we did not need to make an adjustment. Vintage 2024, however, last year included a large increase in net international migration due to humanitarian migration that occurred from 2022 to 2024. So a big improvement that we made this year was that data from the Department of Justice's Executive Office for Immigration Review was used to distribute the humanitarian migrant population in those years, 2022 to 2024, to the specific states and counties where they likely settled. So there's a lot going on in this graph. We will walk through this together slowly, though. So this graph presents the foreign-born immigration estimates and benchmark data from 2015 to 2025. So if you look at that blue line that starts on the left side and is horizontal, that blue line shows the estimates of the foreign-born immigration from the ACS without an adjustment. So that is the unadjusted ROYA. The stacked bars of different colors, those reflect the different types of migrants. So that could be humanitarian migrants, students. And we used administrative data from other agencies to develop these estimates. So if you look at the years from last decade, 2015, 2016, 2017, you'll see that the blue line and those stacked bars have very similar totals. They're about the same height. However, since 2020, you can see that they can be very different. So for the years where they are different, we've adjusted the ACS estimate either up or down to be similar to benchmarks. And that's that black dashed line in the graph. So you can see, for example, in 2020 and 2021, that blue line's a little higher than those benchmark bars. So we pull that blue line down a bit to where that black dash line is. And then 2022, 2023, and 24, we push that blue line up closer to those benchmarks, and that's where that black dash line is. Then in 2025, I said that we did not make an adjustment. You can see that that blue line and that black dash line converge in 2025. It's also very similar to where that benchmark data is. Emigration is the movement of people from the United States. That's a very challenging component to measure, as you might imagine, because people are no longer here, so they can't respond to a census or a survey. So we currently use data from the ACS and a residual method to measure emigration, but that method would not have captured any increased emigration this year. So this summer, we researched several ways to make the emigration estimates more current, and one of those was to look at data from other countries. So for non-US born emigration, we used data from Mexico's National Survey of Occupation and Employment to adjust 2025 emigration totals. This allowed us to see the population in Mexico whose residence 1 year ago was the United States, and that adjustment also accounts for emigration to Central and South American countries. For net US born migration, we were also able to use that same survey to adjust for US born children living in Mexico in 2025. And then the final update to the NIM estimates was to our method for creating the short-term projections. So the short-term projections for NIM and other components are produced each vintage beyond the vintage date to provide population controls for many surveys, for example, the current population survey. And in the past, we would hold the last year of observed NIM data constant for the projected years. But given the dramatic changes to international migration trends that we saw this year, if you remember the black line changing in that graph, we developed a projection method that extended recent trends instead of holding them constant. And you can see the impact of this change in the resident population in at least two tables. One was in January 26 that you can see on our website, and then another table forthcoming in June of 2026. So after all of those method updates that we made, what do we have to show for it? Well, thankfully, I do think we have some really exciting products that have been released and some really exciting content that just came out. So I'll give you a little highlight of some of the things that recently were published. So a press release in January showed that the US population growth had slowed down, predominantly due to historic declines in net international migration. In March, we followed up on that and showed that the slowed growth impacted the largest counties the hardest. We had two different blogs come out, random samplings blogs, which are a little bit longer and a little bit more technical. One of them was about our updates, the data and methods, very much like this presentation, actually. And we also had another one that just delved into net international migration, talked a little bit more about the historic change that we were seeing. We also published 4 America Counts stories. These are shorter blogs that we do. One covered that slowed growth that we had just referred to. One was another dive into net international migration and how it was down in every state and most counties. One was not about international migration, it was domestic migration, and talked about some of the hotspots from 2011 to 2025. And then just a couple weeks ago, if you were tuned into our website, you may have seen that we had a story on the population aging as the nation turns 250. So that was a very high-level overview of some of our recent products, but I'll give you a little taste of the kind of things that you would see inside some of these products. So this is from our January press release, talking about how the population growth had slowed significantly with an increase of only 1.8 million or 0.5% between July 1st, 2024 and July 1st, 2025. What was the reason for that? Largely due to a historic decline in net international migration, which dropped from 2.7 million to 1.3 million. Some highlights from the March release. So some of the country's most populous counties experienced the greatest impacts from lower NIM. We talked a bit in that press release about how some of these very large counties tend to be hubs for international migration. So you can see in the little graphic there, the set of bars all the way on the right, there's a very tall blue one, and then there's a much shorter blue one. So those are counties with 1 million or more people in them. And these are those two blue bars are the rates of international migration. You can see how those very large counties were hit very hard. And since you have so many people, the scale is much larger there as well. This was a really fun graphic that Eric worked on, by the way. And this was also part of our March release that showed every state, DC, and 90% of the nation's counties experienced a decline in net international migration between 2024 and 2025. This graphic has a dot for every 100 people, and it's net international migration. So for every 100 people for net international migration, and it toggles between 2023 and 2024 and 2024 and 2025. So you can see there's a lot of dots, and then there's far fewer dots. A lot of dots, far fewer dots. So that was a really, really informative graphic that Eric and his colleagues made. And then in our story on domestic migration, we talked about a lot of different things, including North Dakota, which had the county with the highest domestic migration rate for 5 years in a row, but also that beginning in 2021, counties in 5 southern states have increasingly topped the domestic migration rankings. You can see some of those southern states and those counties in green have the highest domestic migration rates. And then finally, from just a couple of weeks ago, we had that AC story about the population aging and showed that while women continued to outnumber men at older ages, the gap between the sexes had narrowed in the past 25 years. And then we delve into that a bit and we talk about some of the reasons for that. So we're happy to talk more about any of those findings or any of our products or any part of our method as well. That's all I have for you today. Eric will take all of your questions, and the harder the better. So feel free to let loose.
Great, thank you. Questions for Eric?
Eric and George, any questions?
Well, I'll go ahead. This is very helpful and informative on how, to give a little bit of insight on how you guys track people moving around from year to year. I mean, between domestic migration and international migration, it's always changing, and it's always a challenge to try to track that. And it amazes me that you can actually put numbers to it. So, this provided some insight on how that's done. So that's very informative. And then one question as the population increases and the housing units at the local level, a lot of times we look at trying to project or correspond how many units we have growing with how our population is going to grow. is there any tie between housing units and population in these forecasts, like projecting the number of units and kind of reconciling it with population, or are those two independent calculations or estimates?
They're independent. So George went through it very quickly, but the way we do our housing unit estimate is that we have a component method. So we have like new construction. You can think of that almost like bursts. We have housing unit loss. So that's like deaths. But those numbers come from totally different sources. And our housing unit estimates are used to create our sub-county estimates. But what George has been showing as far as the like county level population estimates, that's a totally different process and it's independent from housing units. We do have like a county control that we use for the sub-county estimates. So that comes from our, cohort component method at the county level, which is burst, deaths, migration. But again, the housing unit estimates are independent and separate from the population estimates at the county level. Does that make sense? It's a little confusing.
Yeah, no, from sitting at a small local government, looking at very controlled housing numbers and populations, it's just very different than the way you guys have to approach it. So,
right.
Now that it does make sense that housing is entirely separate, because locally we look for correlations and patterns, and a lot of times they aren't there.
Yeah.
So, a lot of times we're building a lot more houses and our population isn't increasing the way we would think it would, so what I'm struggling with is the correlation between new houses built and the lack of new population. So that's where my question came from. So thank you.
Yeah, we've gotten that question before, and people say, hey, we're seeing a lot of housing change, but we're not seeing as much population change. And again, the sources of data that we use for those population and housing are much different, and so we do get like new construction information, permitted builds. It depends on like specifically what's available for that sub-county area. But when we do have, but we use all that kind of administrative data to do the housing unit. Hey, Al, nice to see you. I saw you jumped on the call.
Sorry, is it okay if I ask a question, Matt? So hopefully.
Yeah, help yourself. Very informative here. Everybody, please jump in and ask.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, haven't seen you in a while. Eric, good to see you. A very nice presentation, George. So I have a couple of questions specific to Maryland in general. As you probably know, you probably live in Maryland. Maryland's population growth is mostly due to international migration. With the new change in methodology in 2025, we've seen a little less increase, if that's the right way to say it, compared to before. And then some of the jurisdictions where we see growth, like George, you mentioned in the presentation about the bigger counties where there's a lot more international migration, have been impacted. And some counties have seen growth for the first time in the previous vintage, and now they haven't, or seen a decline slightly, specifically our urban jurisdictions. So one thing, it's hard to message like why this population change has happened. Is it because like people have been leaving, or is it due to the change in the methodology of the Census Bureau? But again, like any information you could provide us to specifically answer these questions would be helpful. And the other thing I wanted to ask is about the change in methodology for group totals. We have done an extensive survey and provided detailed information to the Bureau, probably not before the ask deadline, but like a couple of weeks later. I wasn't sure if that was incorporated into the 2025 estimates, probably not, but because we have seen a little bit of increase in group quarters, but that didn't reflect in the estimates is what I thought. But again, like I'll let you answer some of the questions I asked. Any information you can provide.
Yeah, so first of all, as far as your group quarters submission, I'm not sure if that was incorporated. You said it was after the deadline a little bit. We can inquire and have that team get back to you. Uh, as far as the international migration estimates, so Vintage 24 saw a huge increase in international migration nationally, and also that would have been distributed down to states and counties. And that was because there was a large number of humanitarian migrants that came in 22, 23, 24, and we didn't really account for those new migrants until vintage 24. And so that's why it was such a big increase from the prior year. So a lot of places saw that big jump in international migration for vintage 24. Vintage 25, we saw a historic decline in international migration, and it was decline in both. Sorry, it was a decline in the number of people coming into the United States. There was also an increase in the number of people leaving. A couple of things to point out. One is that we do estimate years, and so these aren't calendar years, and so that that last period in 2020, vintage 2025, it actually covers July 1st, 24 up until June 30th, 25. And so it really covers two different periods of immigration policies in the United States. But in the fall of 24, we were seeing a decline in the number of, especially those humanitarian migrants and other new immigrants. But then, especially in that first half of 25, we saw big increases in the number of people leaving. And so that's why we saw that historic decline. And then it's projected for 2026, at least our 2025 estimates, we projected that 26, if all things were continuing, all patterns continuing, that it would go down to a net international migration total of only 300,000 for the country. So this is going from a high of almost 3 million in 24 to a decline, in 26 of 300,000. So again, that's historic. And we saw that in vintage 25 that there was a decline in NIM, international migration, for all states, and for 90% of counties, and for those remaining 10%, they just didn't see a change. So there was no growth in NIM anywhere, like for any county. A couple things changed for vintage 25, and George talked about these, but one is that we improved the method that we use to distribute the humanitarian migrants to states and counties. And the prior year, we didn't have a specific method. And so if a county was getting international migration, it just got a little more of it because of the humanitarian migrants. But we knew that those humanitarian migrants, they weren't going necessarily like to Alaska or to Hawaii. They were going to specific places. And so using this new data set for vintage 25, it's the data from the Executive Office for Immigration Review at the Department of Justice. We were able to put these humanitarian migrants in the states and counties where they thought they were going. And so you would see potentially changes from vintage 24 where big increases. And one of the things that we saw is that in vintage 24, we put a fair number of these humanitarian migrants into Washington, D.C. But then when we used the EOR data, it brought down the number in Washington, D.C., and it put more of them in Maryland. And so those are some of the trends that we saw. And given, sort of conversations we've had with people, they thought that was accurate. They said that a lot of the migrants who were bused to DC were encouraged to go to Maryland because of differences in the immigration court system there versus DC. And so, again, those are some of the things that we saw in the data.
I have one quick follow-up. This is basically what Steve kind of alluded to about the housing unit construction activity or the building permits. I know this is only looked at the municipal level that Amal collects. And I reached out to Christine actually because in Baltimore City, Jamie's here, maybe she can address this as well. There are conversions of uses from, say, commercial to residential. And we have documented this and sent that over to the Bureau. And there are some policies that even the governor implemented that is encouraging housing unit growth in the city, substantially. So again, this isn't going to be captured to your cohort component methodology because you actually need to see at the migration part. But again, Baltimore City being unique, it's also a municipality, treated as a municipality, but a county too. So when we submitted the data, nothing has happened. Again, like even in sub-county geographies, when we submit this building permit information, I'm not really sure how it is incorporated because it's only looking at new units per se. I'm not sure if you take into consideration the change in use and conversion of housing to housing unit.
Yeah, and that's always
That's
been a challenge, the conversion from non-residential to residential, and like mixed use areas that have, where part of the building is commercial and the other part is residential. So I don't work, like I don't know how the building permit survey, how that the data that they're getting, because that's where we get a lot of this from. But it sounds like you've talked already with several people at the bureau. It might be something that we elevate a little bit and set up a meeting to get more information from you, and then it might not be. I don't know if you've considered a challenge, because for other people on the call, we do have a challenge process or program for our population estimates, because we're always trying to improve those. So if there's something that we're missing, a municipality, a local, a governmental area can or unit can, submit information to challenge our estimate. We do an evaluation of that, and if it looks like we're not, if it looks like our estimates are not accurate, we do correct the estimates. And so that's another option for that as well.
right. And lastly, I don't want to take this over. Last question as well. So when we do this housing unit review, when ML sends us over to us, we do a comprehensive. We put a little bit of effort in it and send back the information, and we do get an acknowledgement. But we don't see the result. Going through the challenge process, it is really hard because we can't really get you the exact information on migration per se. But vital tickets are good, like births, deaths. You also have that access. So again, like any feedback we provide, we get acknowledged, but we don't see the results. Just saying it out, and I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, I think it'd be great, Al, to set up a meeting where we could talk about some of this in more detail. But we do try to be like, so FSCPE, they do get to review
Mhm.
the housing unit data early, and they can make comments and everything. And if your comments aren't being incorporated and you're not hearing like the reasons why, then we need to have better communication with you and your team. So we can definitely try to make that happen.
Yeah, I will be there at the FSCP meeting later this year.
Oh,
So
great, great, great.
in May. So maybe we'll talk about
Yeah,
it.
well, let's
Thank you.
we'll talk about that there. Yeah,
I'm done.
thanks, Al.
Al, can you hear me? So,
Hi.
good. A quick following up on Al. So my name is Jeff Brano. I work in Howard County, Maryland. And similar to what Al was saying, I've noticed, like last decade, we track our population based on new housing construction. This is probably a common thing. Maybe the question is are the challenges based on that? What I noticed was that the population estimates program typically produces less population growth than what we're estimating based on housing units. And then by the time the census rolls around in 2020, for example, it does show that the population estimates program was a little bit low because it kind of caught back up. And I'm noticing the same thing this time, but even more so. So the difference between our projection based on new housing being built and what's coming out, and I know it's very complicated with this international immigration. It's very difficult. So that's probably one of the reasons why it's happening. But I do notice that we're projecting a fairly significant more growth than what's coming out of the population estimates program. So, I don't know, Al, if you want to set that meeting up, if you wanted to have a local talk about it at least. There are two different methodologies. I know birth rates are slowing, and so that has a big impact. And it's a completely different methodology. But there has been a history of the population being less than what we project and what comes out when the census rolls around. So, Yeah.
But sorry, I'll set that up, Jeff. Maybe I'll reach out to Eric and maybe Christine. I don't know who's going to be there. But one thing was what Jeff was alluding to, the difference between the 2010 and the actual 2020 observation versus the census estimates the last decade. One of the bigger things that was, I think, was a little off was the domestic migration, which was much higher, showing a much higher decline of domestic outmigration for Maryland versus what actually happened, because looking at the components of change. But also in this decade, we are still seeing that. But what I'm also, the housing market isn't as good as it was before. People aren't moving out with the higher interest rates. The available housing inventory is not that high. Maybe there's new construction going on. So that might also dampen the outmigration a little bit. But again, that's something that we can say without actual data, because we don't have the tax records and all that stuff to figure out the outmigration and whatnot. But maybe that's something that you guys can take a closer look at.
Yeah, it's interesting that you saw this last decade and you're seeing it again. It makes me think that there's something unique about Howard County and about these other counties in Maryland, especially ones that are part of the DC metro area, that our methods might not be capturing, whether it's domestic migration, whether it's international migration, we might not be capturing some aspect to that. I said earlier, it's a different method we have for housing units and a different method for population. And we know that they don't always track, not our methods, but I mean population growth and housing growth, one might precede the other and everything. So it's really complicated, but it's something that we should be trying to improve, especially if it's something you saw last decade, you're seeing again. So I think it'd be great for us to talk with, some of the Maryland folks and, just try to understand better what's happening in the data. And if there's something we can improve, we definitely want to. So.
Yeah, Baltimore County and Prince George's County had a significant increase in population compared to the estimates for the last decade. And mostly, I think it was the migration component that was a little off.
Okay.
Okay, I just wanted to, Al had mentioned Baltimore cities and the conversions, and Jamie Williams answered in the chat that they do capture conversions of all units in their building permit data. It required some cleanup though, but they're happy to include the city's DHCD in the conversations. So just passing that on.
Sorry, Steve, I will coordinate with Jamie and make sure that we have the data before we do our review for housing units for the municipal estimates and pass it on. Thank you.
Any other questions for George, Eric, or Stacy? Okay, hearing none. Thank you very much for being here today. It was a very informative presentation and very helpful, and had some good discussion. Really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you. And we appreciate the opportunity to talk with your group. I've talked with you guys before, and it's always very interesting. So
no, we'll have you back.
Hey.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Yep. Take care.
Yeah. Bye.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is UPWP 2027 project review, and Matt's going to give us an update on that.
Hello, everyone. Give me a second to get my screen shared. This is just going to be an update on the UPWP for anyone who has seen this in another meeting already this year. I am sorry for the second or third time that you are going to see this. This is just going to be a quick overview of the 2027 planning budget and unified planning work program. Can everybody see my screen, the display?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Go ahead and move on with this. All right. So for the UPWP, this outlines all of our planning activities, priorities, responsibilities, and general layout for transportation planning. This is how we are securing federal funding for our transportation projects. This is going to include all of our jurisdictions. The planning work program itself is for emphasizing the importance of public input, compliance with federal regulations, key planning areas, and data collection, safety, access to transportation, and public involvement. The BRTB coordinates with state agencies, transit operators, local jurisdictions, and the public to address short-term and long-term transportation priorities. We are just outside of our deadline for public comments. On the next slide, I'll go ahead and provide a brief overview of that. I believe the deadline actually ended on the 10th instead of the 8th. So we just wrapped up the review of those comments. And then this Friday, I believe they will be presented to the meeting of the BRTB. And after that, you'll see that we have this plan set up for July to begin the fiscal year 2027 work program. So during that public involvement period, we had a 30-day comment period that was the February 8th through March 10th. The link for that there. We had 436 visits, 28 participants, and 46 comments. Of those comments, we saw that there was need for clear standards and planning for bus rapid transit, transit supportive development, and missing middle housing. We have new regional bike ped corridors and trail connections, evaluate the impacts of highway expansion and congestion, focus more on implementing projects and not just planning, and provide training opportunities. While that last one is very broad, I think we all get the general gist of that. For funding, this is just a general overview here for the sources and uses of these funds. This is, again, just to provide an overview. For any specific questions, please feel free to reach out to our office if you have any questions about specific funds and allocations. So these are going to be our UWP focus areas for the fiscal year 2027. You'll see there's a myriad of projects here. I'm not going to go through all of them with you. Some of these will be familiar. If there are any questions about any of these, again, please reach out to us. You'll see there that I do have the household travel survey funding highlighted. We've presented on the household travel survey here in this group before, so we have an updated one coming. So I wanted to highlight that for everyone. So between 2018 and 2019, BMC conducted the latest statewide Maryland travel survey, or the household travel survey. This was randomly selected houses across the state, were polled about trips that they make for work, school, shopping, errands, etc. The products of these surveys formed a consolidated data set. These have been used for refinement of statewide and regional activity-based models. So this project will include matching funds to fund the MDOT to update the regional and statewide housing travel survey. Again, this is going to allow more or a better analysis of trends in personal and household travel. And this will include daily non-commercial travel by all modes, including characteristics of the people traveling, their households, and their vehicles. So while this is not necessarily a census or population-based product, this is also going to give us a greater understanding of some of the demographics that are behind both travel modalities and use and adoption of travel. So just something to highlight out there, that there will be updates coming within that household travel survey. And again, for any additional information that you may have concerning figures of the program itself, Todd's email is here for any general questions or just for any updates. Please feel free to reach out to me. Pretty simple for that. Does anyone have any questions concerning the UPWP? Al?
Hi, Matt. I think it's really nice that you guys are considering doing a household travel survey. I would be interested in that, and when you have some info, on the RFP or whoever the process, I would like to
Of course,
be,
absolutely.
yeah, aware of what's going on. Because we work with MDOT, and one of the things that came up was looking at different trips, not just your work to home, because like with the telecommuting being more
Hmm.
prominent nowadays, there are other trips that have an impact on the VMT, and obviously that's what
Exactly. And that's
you're
great to point
looking
out with work from home trends. Not every trip is a trip to work. So
right.
being able
So,
to capture that is really important.
yeah, because I'm thinking like it's after the COVID, I guess, right? So the travel
Yeah,
patterns would have changed. So I would be interested in seeing what's going on. Thanks. Yep.
great. Anyone else?
No. Any other questions for Matt on the UPWP projects? Jeff?
I have a question. So Matt,
Hey, what's
is
up?
regarding the projections that we do, how does that going to work this year?
For the forecasts,
Yeah.
as far as I know, that will not be associated with UPWP. That's LRTP, if I'm not mistaken.
So is there an expectations that we provide updated projections at the end of this year?
No, the projections that we have right now, the forecast that we're working through for round 10A are going to be the only updates that we're doing at present.
So there's no estimate of, like right now, the base year is 2020.
Yeah.
What year would we switch to 2025?
I think the next time that we'll be able to switch to 2025 is whenever we have the ACS data released for 2025 at the lowest kind of population level.
Okay, so I think that might be this fall.
Yeah, it should. If they keep with their original schedule,
Yeah.
naturally they're not on the call right now,
Okay.
but they normally drop them in either October or December,
Right.
if I'm not mistaken. So if that is the same schedule for the ACS updates, then once we have that or able to look at it, get any concerns addressed, then I think that that would be the next time that we would update that base year. Because for between decennial years, we have to use the best that we have. And while the ACS is not perfect, it's at least a official estimate.
Right. Okay. So then it may be that we provide forecasts at the end of 2028, for example. Or I'm not
Potentially,
sorry, 2027, end of 2027.
Yes.
So not this year, because typically we do it every year if we have updates, but you're saying based on the schedule, the BRTV schedule, no anticipation for the end of 2026, but maybe at the end of 2027.
Potentially.
Potentially.
Yes, whenever there is that possible update for the base year, because I know it's been the struggle for all of us here to continue carrying forward with that 2020 base year, considering we all know that the numbers are not accurate, and doing the best that we can with that. I think this update that they've done with the mark file instead of using the blended base is definitely a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
I've been looking at some of the estimates, and I think the changes that they're making are better reflecting both the forecast that we're doing and kind of trends that we've been seeing in the ACS as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely think that that is smoothing that process out to where, as everybody was pointing out, with the projections being significantly different, largely under what we are projecting for growth as well.
Yeah.
I think that that's going to help to really smooth that out.
Okay. So that's actually a good opportunity. And I think it would be important for this group to really start working on the estimates in 2027, only because 10A is quite old at this point. And I do know there's been a lot of changes, with that was brought up earlier today with, immigration, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So, I understand it doesn't make sense to do this year, but I think it will be important for the counties in the region to once the ACS comes out to do it in 2027. That's just my view, because it has been a while. We used to do them every year as an option, but we haven't done an official round where we work as a group, where we have an official base that we all agree on, driven by BMC in large part. When Sean was here, he did a really good job of creating a methodology that we would agree with. I think the last time we did that was probably 3 years ago, maybe. So it's been a while. So I just think for this group, it's important that we have a plan to do that. That's all. Work it into our efforts. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and you're definitely right. The last time that this was done with the updating of the base and then really moving it up with an updated methodology for round 10 was 2022.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why I understand ACS is important. I think we might have used ACS. I forget Sean's methodology, but yeah. And it's, the other thing is you don't want to do a projections if it's not going to be used as part of the BRTB, right? Because what's the point? So if it's got to match that. So maybe 2027 is a good time. So that's, that's all. Yeah. So, yeah.
And we can definitely keep discussing it. And I'm sure as more things evolve, there will be more discussions.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks. Questions from anyone else?
Anybody?
Okay.
Hey, Matt. This is Greg Goodwin from
Greg, how are you?
Doing good. I would echo Jeff's comment. We're also kind of looking kind of ahead for our next round. We completed our 10.1. It was approved by our COG board back in October of 2025. So we're definitely getting a lot of interest from our jurisdictions about updating, especially the employment numbers. And I think you're right. We would probably be shifting to a 2025 base year for that next round. And again, we're kind of anticipating the ACS 2025 data would probably be kind of one of the starting points for that type of work. So yeah, we're kind of in step with y'all as well.
That's good to hear. All right.
Anything else? So we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is BMC Population Dashboard Update, which Matt will present on as well. Thanks, Matt.
Yep. All right, just real quick, I am going to post the link to the dashboard in the chat for anyone who wants to have a look at that while I'm going through it, but I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So if you're ever doing this, it is always best to start in full screen mode. We have the instructions there that say that. I highly recommend it, or else whenever you click into this population estimates and dynamics of change right here, it is going to cut off about half the graphs that we're going to be looking at, or half the charts. So full screen mode is always best. As we just got a presentation on, Vintage 2025 has been published. I am just going to quickly go through some top line notes for all jurisdictions, just really going to cover the changes in kind of population movement or change in general between the 24 and 25 updates. And then really just touch on migration to where we can see where these changes in largely, as Eric and was just saying, we're seeing some significant downward shifts in international migration. So whenever you click in here, oh, it's reloading my content. There we go. All right. So this is going to pull up all of your components of change and general population change and population estimates for your jurisdiction. You've got this handy drop-down box up here, which will pull up everyone for you. We can just start with Anne Arundel. We're carrying forward with that population increase, along with an increased rate of change. So we'll see that we are kind of ticking up in that rate of population change with a increase in population as well. It's just that we are starting to see a little bit of slowing down, but we are sustaining that growth as well. With migration, it's recovering since an overall decline in 2023. That was largely due to an overall reduction in domestic migration, so increased out migration. But we're starting to see a reversal of that kind of out migration. So domestic migration is kind of getting closer to that zero bar. Maybe we will see this revert to a increase and see positive in migration begin there as well. For international migration, you can see that there's a significant drop from 2024. As Eric was saying, a lot of that is probably due to some lumping of these 2022, 2023, and 2024 international migrants, to where this drop here might not be as significant as what they are showing, but it is still a drop nonetheless. International migration has slowed, and that is leading to, while there is still a increase in overall net migration or an increase in population driven by net migration, we're seeing that it is not necessarily matching that trend in population growth as well. So if the international migration were to continue at rates of increase since 2020, maybe we would see that this would be carrying on with a potential larger increase to population, but it is likely that net migration is going to start to play a reduced impact in overall population gain, and that natural increase may be starting to lead a little bit more of that share in population growth. You can go ahead and move on Baltimore City. So showing a loss right here of 56 persons. I am going to go ahead and call that within the margin of error, and we'll just call population flat in Baltimore City from version 2024 or vintage 2024 to vintage 2025. So instead of seeing a complete reversal in trend where Baltimore City gained population for the first time in 10 years, we will just say that it is sitting flat at the population gain from last year, because that negative 56 is really going to be negligible, kind of holding right here at this basically the same population. We are seeing a kind of reversal in the leading components of change. So over the past decade, net migration has overwhelmingly been the leading driver. You'll see this negative net migration here improving in 2024 and dropping again in 2025. International migration being the largest driver of positive change. Out migration has been steady, although it is reducing in its kind of severity as the years go on. We'll see in vintage 2025, there was fewer out migrants or domestic out migrants than there were in vintage 2024. You will also see that natural increase is on a slow but kind of sustained increase. So we could be seeing maybe a potential increase in overall births, and deaths will relatively level out. So again, perhaps less of an impact in overall forces of net migration and more of an impact that is going to be led by natural increase. So population change driven by just natural processes of births and deaths. Go ahead and move on to the county. So for the county, they're actually showing a population loss of roughly 800, so 788. There was a small gain in population that was attributed in 2024, but this 2025 change in population, which shows a slight reduction, is very similar to what we were seeing in 2023, in 2020 as well. Just a slight loss in population that is normally or mostly being driven by that decline in net migration. So while domestic migration has remained with negative out migration or increased out migration, leading to a reduction in population through domestic migration, that is normally compensated by international migration. But as with everywhere in all counties, we are seeing a decline in that predicted international migration, which is no longer compensating for that loss in domestic migration. So you're seeing an overall negative net migration um, that is largely not accounted for through natural increase or covered by natural increase. So it is not enough to compensate in the population for that loss due to outmigration. So there's potential to where we're going to see here more of these kind of small losses or kind of small gains, but I do not anticipate that the population change will veer too far uh, from the x-axis for, I think, the next projection or two. And then we'll see where populations are going to kind of level out and land after that. So that brings us to the MSA as a whole. Still experiencing growth, but it is at a slowed rate than what was estimated in 2024. Again, we're seeing that decline in international migration, leading to net migration being relatively flat over here compared to what we're seeing in 2024. Again, natural increase still positive, but again, it is natural increase is kind of compensating for those reductions in international migration, which would largely be driving that population growth. So natural increase is kind of maintaining the stability of the population without that international migration driven increase. Now for Carroll. This is the first time that they are estimating a population loss in Carroll since 2015. So we'll see about 113. Again, this is kind of a negligible loss, but for the population, we can consider it a slight reduction in the trend. You're seeing that natural increase is declining. So we're seeing more deaths than we are births. And with that net migration significantly decreasing over the past few years, you'll see that it was anticipated that there was a net migrant of 15 into the county, being driven largely by domestic outmigration and reductions in overall international migration. I don't think that this is anything significantly alarming. This trend will either continue to stay relatively flat. We can see a potential reversal into population change and increase. If this does continue to lead to population decline, I wouldn't say, judging by these numbers, that it would be anything significant or much to worry about, but just something to keep an eye on for trends as we move along and continue to look at these estimates throughout the years. Nope, skipped Harvard. Clicked too quick. So for Harvard, continued growth, but at a slower growth rate than that we saw in 23 and 24. Domestic migration is still positive and it's increasing since 2024. International migration has remained positive as well, but at reduced rates than that we saw in 2024 for 2025. So again, we're still maintaining overall positive net migration, positive natural increase, seeing continued population growth, just not at the same rates that they were showing in 2023 and 2024, so slightly reduced. But we still see overall population growth. Howard, population increase, you're doing slightly lower than 2024 with, I think, with those changes that were made to migration almost everywhere, with very few exceptions, there has been a significant decrease in the estimate of international migration vintage 2025 compared to vintage 2024. So largely all population changes, whether they are going to be negative or positive, will largely be driven by any change in international migration. Still positive in net migration, even though we see that slowing in international migration, but we are also seeing a slowing in domestic out migration that is helping to compensate for that lower international migration. So again, more people staying in Howard, even though we are seeing fewer people that are migrating internationally into the county. And last, we will pop on over to Queen Anne's, to where you'll see that population increase is still holding. We're seeing it at that kind of sustained, slow and steady growth. A bit of a change in the rate of growth between 2024 and 2025, but not much for concern. As you'll see, as I've been saying everywhere, reduced international migration. Still remaining positive in domestic in-migration. Again, a little bit lower than 24, keeping that net migration positive and natural increase as well. So we are going to just go ahead and call it that Queen Anne's will have steady and slow growth, pretty much continuing unless we see any more massive shifts in migration that could potentially drive that down. But for now, I think steady as she goes is kind of a great way to put it. And if there's any questions about the dashboards, let me know. It has been fully updated to include 2025. So for anything here where you can see components of population change, you can go through and select anything that you might need. Everything is updated to include those vintage 2025 estimates now, except for these age structure and dependency rates down here. As Eric noted in the presentation, those won't be released until end of June, I believe, is their current schedule. So whenever those additional estimates are released, I will get them updated to the dashboard and let everybody know. Does anyone have any questions there? And I can pull the dashboard back up for anyone.
Send us the link.
Yeah. I dropped it in the chat in Zoom. Can you see it there?
Oh, public Tableau. Okay.
Yep, that's the one.
All right.
That should link you directly to it. If not, let me know and I can get that link updated, but I'll also send it in the follow-up email.
Okay.
And it'll be
included
in the minutes for anyone.
And also, any update on going over our projections or?
Still in the process right now.
Okay.
I'm getting comments put together for any kind of TAZs where not even I would need more of an explanation, but just kind of like a question mark as to why changes would have occurred. Haven't come across too much, but everyone should be hearing from me, I would say, probably end of month or early May with any kind of questions or updates. But yeah, it's moving through it now, going well, at least on my end. If there's any questions that anybody has while I'm working through it, feel free to shoot them over to me. I know it's kind of been I guess, in a limbo area, but yeah, if anybody has any questions, just reach out.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, thanks, Matt. And any other business for the cooperative forecasting group? Any other questions, comments while everybody's here?
I mean, I was just going to provide an update on the kind of forecast round. So that answered that question. So thanks, Kathleen, for putting that out there.
Okay. Anything else? Going once, going twice. All right. We can go ahead and close the meeting, and the next meeting will be June 24th, and that's a virtual meeting.
Should be as of now. And again, even for those that we do decide to offer the in-person option, they will always be hybrid. So everyone will have the option to attend virtually, even for hybrid meetings.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. That concludes the meeting.
All right, thank you.
In June. Appreciate it. Thanks,
Thanks,
Matt.
everyone. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.